Well, good morning. I'm glad you all are here. We are in the beginning of a series, Relationships That Thrive, that are based on 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'd like to start today by talking about what our country just celebrated this last week, the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. God used Dr. King to hold up a mirror to our nation and show us that we harm our own soul when we diminish the souls of others. Though like the rest of us, Dr. King had character flaws. Many of the qualities that shine through Dr. King are a challenge to us to be the best version of ourselves. Two of these qualities that so marked Dr. King, we are going to talk about today: patience and kindness. Now, you may or may not have had the opportunity this week to watch the many TV documentaries about both Martin Luther as well as the civil rights movement. But there were many that showed the atrocities of that time, both before and during civil rights, and to kind of help us get a grasp on the environment, if you wish, that Dr. King was working in. I'd like to go to something that he wrote. He was jailed in Birmingham, and this was a letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. King writes, "We have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you've seen hate-filled police curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and you see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and you see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and to see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son in agonizing pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and you find it necessary to sleep at night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you're humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John. When your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you're harried by the day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at the tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience." Dr. King wrote this from a Birmingham jail in response to several religious leaders who accused him of breaking the laws of the land and wondering why. And this was his response. You would think, in light of such atrocities, that Dr. King would be impatient in a way that would give birth to anger and a violent response. Who could blame him? However, history finds itself surprised, because though Dr. King was impatient for justice, his advocacy on how to make that change happen reflected the patience of 1 Corinthians 13. Dr. King was inspired by the ideals of nonviolence, first espoused by Jesus, later modeled by Gandhi. He promoted nonviolent civil disobedience as a method, the best method to fight for civil rights. Though the protesters did their best to remain peaceful, quietly sit at lunch counters, quietly sit at the front of the bus, they were very often met with violence from onlookers, from haters, and often from the police themselves. King himself was arrested multiple of times. But all through this, Dr. King insisted that the movement courageously be faithful to 6 principles that he laid out in his book, Stride Towards Freedom. 6 principles of nonviolence. The first is nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Dr. King taught and believed that nonviolence was an aggressive mental, emotional, and spiritual stance. It was not passive, but aggressive. Principle 2 was that nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding, and that the end result of nonviolence wasn't to win, wasn't to get what was mine, but it was redemption and reconciliation. His third principle was that nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice, not people. He recognized that evildoers are also victims of their own evil. The fourth principle was that nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform, and that when they accepted suffering without retaliation, it could be used in redemptive ways. It could transform people when they saw that kind of love, which leads to the fifth principle. Nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. It chose to fight hate and evil and ignorance with a powerful force, really an unlikely force called love. Lastly, the sixth principle, nonviolence believes the universe is on the side of justice. He believed that those who responded nonviolently, who were patient, their patient resistance was based on a deep faith that justice will eventually win out. Why? Because God is a God of justice. Dr. King had an unwavering belief that to win the day, patient courage was the best weapon against evil and hate. And in the midst of all the hate and violence, Dr. King worked hard not to let his own heart give way to hate. He consistently modeled kindness, though he had people throw things at him and curse him and threaten his family, arrest him. His attitude was that of kindness, as reflected in one of the greatest speeches of the modern era. August 20th, 1963, in the speech, I Have a Dream, Martin Luther spoke these words: I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream, he said, that one day the red hills of Georgia, if you would, enemy territory, the sons that on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at a table of brotherhood. His dream was that someday his enemies would not be seen as the losers, the nobodies, but as brothers. Dr. King was a living example of how an imperfect man, not a saint, a man much like you and I, but through the strength of the living God, can live a life of love. Particularly the words of 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. In these verses and the ones to follow that we are to study, love is not so much defined as it is described. It is not theoretical, it is practical. It is not sentimental. It's not about an inner feeling or emotion. It has to be shown. It is defined by what it does and does not do. It cannot be hidden in the heart. As a matter of fact, this word in Greek called agape, it's the Greek word, really is best translated the demonstration of love. It is much like the response that Goldie gives Tevye in the musical Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye asks his wife, "Do you love me?" And her response, "Do I what?" He says, "Do you love me?" Now remember, these two, like much of the world, even till today, their marriage was arranged by mother and father. There was no romantic love involved. And so Goldie asked herself the question, do I love him? Then, speaking to herself, she reviews, for 25 years, I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. For 25 years, my bed is his. If that's not love, what is? And Tevye exclaims, then you love me! And Goldie simply says, I suppose I do. Simply put, love is what love does. Love is what love does. And the first thing that Paul says that love does is that it is patience. It is patient. Patience is bearing the offenses and injuries of others. It's to be mild and slow in avenging. It quite literally can be translated long-suffering. It is slow to anger. It is slow to punish. This kind of patience is closely related to God's own mercy. It is a characteristic of God himself. God is patient with you and I, especially with those who have received his free gift of love and forgiveness. He has chosen to patiently choose not to pour out his anger and his wrath, but instead pour out forgiveness and grace and save us and make us his family. This is our example of patience. This is how we are to be patient. This is best exemplified by Christ himself in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus is speaking and he's redefining again, what does it mean to follow after and to love God? And he wants to give them a picture of what God's kingdom is like. What would it look like to live in God's house, in God's world? How is it different than the world we live in? And so he tells this story in Matthew chapter 18, beginning at verse 23. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven, this is God's kingdom, is like a king, the king is God, who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. We are his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Now, basically, Jesus tells us in a hyperbole, this is a ridiculous amount of money. This is an amount of money that could not be paid back. It's like $1 trillion. Not even Trump has a hope for that. That's how much this guy owes. And since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him, and he uses this word we find in 1 Corinthians 13. Be patient with me. He begged, and I will pay back everything. The context is, no, he won't. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt. He didn't wait. He canceled the debt, and he let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, just a few dollars, easily something that can be paid back. He grabbed him and he began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and they begged him, here's the word, patient with me, and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all that he owed. And then Jesus says this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from the heart. God's word says it's really simple. I know everything you've done. I know everything that you thought about doing. And I even know why you do what you do. The good and especially the bad. And in the midst of all that, I choose not to hold it against you. Now in this story, he just forgave the debt. But in real life, it wasn't a debt he could just forgive. He paid the debt through the life of his son. And then he said, I let go of the grievance I have against you. And his children are then compelled to do the same. When we brush up against others that are at fault. It doesn't say the guy didn't owe him money. The person was at fault. We said, but as you received, you need to give. Like I said before, this translation of this word patient literally means long suffering. It suggests not only a merely willingness to wait a long time or endure suffering without giving way, but it really means endurance of injustice without retaliation. The injustice of you owe me, but I choose not to retaliate. I choose not to hold it against you. Now, the truth is, this kind of love often goes against the grain of our modern sensibility. I mean, we go to great lengths to find someone that will make us happy so we can avoid suffering. I mean, that is the basic premise, if you would, of books and YouTube videos and Match.com and eHarmony. And that's the basic principle is this. Listen. Tell us who you are, what you like, what you hate, how you're wired. What we'll do is we'll look at our database and we'll find someone who likes what you like, hates what you hate, has the same background as you. Why? So you're compatible and there's no conflict. Which, first of all, is a bunch of garbage in the first place. But second of all, that's not love. That's just existing with someone. That is not love. Love does not work that way. C.S. Lewis puts it this way very poignantly, so you may not want to listen to this. To love at all is to be vulnerable. I don't like that. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will be unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside heaven that you can be perfectly safe from all dangers and to be perturbed of love is hell. Ouch. Ouch. Long-suffering means being patient with an insufferable situation or person. Even when you're hurting badly yourself, especially when you're hurting badly yourself. Why? Because God loved you that way, and you want to have the same kind of love. God uses, this is love. Every great marriage that I know, every great friendship that I know, if you sit down and you ask them to tell you their story, you usually find somewhere in the past there was great woundedness in the relationship. And rather than the two people going, well, we're done. I'm not happy anymore. There was an act of love by one person forgiving, by the other person being forgiven. And they worked it through. Not in a day, not in a week, not in a month. But they worked it through, long suffering. And now when they say they love each other, it doesn't mean we agree on everything. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have some habits that just drive her nuts. It doesn't mean that she's got some ways about her where he'd just rather turn it off. It means that despite those things, they are committed through the suffering. They are committed through the inconveniences because they truly love each other. Kindness. Kindness is actively to provide something beneficial for someone else. It's being ready to show favors and to do good. It seeks to be useful. It actually searches out to do good. Kindness is not a response to something somebody else did. That's just to be courteous. Kindness looks for opportunities, goes out of its way to be a blessing to others. It is not a respecter of the object of who they're being kind to. A great example of this, again, would be Jesus' words in Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 32. Again, he's turning the world upside down, especially the religious world. Starting in verse 32 again, Jesus says this. He says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? You find the perfect match, big deal. Even sinners love those who love them. Sinners you're talking about is the unreligious, people who would have nothing to do with God. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? The people you like to hang out with. Big deal. Again, even the non-religious, the selfish do that. And if you lend to those from whom you can expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Why? Because even again, sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But, he says, love your enemies. Do good to them and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. That's kindness. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons and daughters of the Most High, because, here's our word, He is kind. to the ungrateful. He is kind to the ungrateful. He is kind to the wicked. Be merciful, therefore, just as your Father is merciful. Jesus says, choose the person that's driving you nuts in your neighborhood, in your work, in your friend group, in your home, in your church. And he says, love them. Love them. What does that mean? Be good to them. Be good to them. What do you mean? When they're in need and it costs you something, lend to them. Speak well of them. Encourage them. Give to them. Open the door for them. Smile at them. This is one of those scriptures where it's easy to say, amen, and really not understand what we're saying amen to. Let me ask you this. How much do you love the members of ISIS? How much do you love the latest person who shot up a school or a church or a movie theater? How much do you love the person on the other side of the political aisle running for president right now? Remember, Jesus and his audience lived under an oppressive, occupying Roman government. The Romans employed torture and murder to keep people in line. Saddam Hussein would have been a great Roman. Everyone listening to Jesus say these words at this time, love your enemies. They had had plenty of experience of, I hate those people with every ounce of my guts. They could think of what soldiers and the government had done daily to oppress them and their family and their loved ones. And Jesus said, be kind. One of my favorite examples of this is that towards the end of the American Civil War, President Lincoln was speaking, and he spoke sympathetically about the Southern rebels in a public address. So he was trying to bring the country together as the war was beginning to come to a close. But an elderly woman, a staunch unionist, pro-Lincoln, lambasted him for speaking kindly about their enemies, and that he instead should be destroying them. Then Lincoln answered her with a classic reply, why, madam, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? That is kindness. Let me explain it in terms of a pillow and a rock. If you imagine if somebody launches something out at you, patience is responding with a pillow, kind of absorbs the impact, rather than a rock, which just shatters and sends back a lot of times pieces that were thrown at it. Likewise, kindness is rather than taking truth like a rock and throwing it at someone else, it's taking the grace of a pillow, something soft and pleasurable, if you would, and tossing it back at folks. God calls us to be a pillow, both in receiving as well as giving, rather than the American way of our rights, really the human way of our rights. I deserve, they deserve. Thank God he didn't give us what we deserve. Now, if you're anything like me, you're saying, okay, but deep in your mind, you're resisting this kind of love. Maybe right now, carefully in your head, you're documenting all the reasons why one particular person doesn't deserve your patience or kindness. They deeply wounded you. They are evil incarnate. If you only knew. If you only knew. Let me tell you, I'm not throwing any rocks your way. I'm not pointing any fingers. I understand there's some things that are deeply troubling. All I would say is this about God's love. As a matter of fact, I feel so strongly about this, I put this in your handout here, this quote. When a young man reveals his heart with a passionate declaration, I love you, at least in part this means that he finds the woman he loves lovely. At least some of his love is elicited by the object of that love. But God loves what is unlovely. God loves what is unlovely. As if John 3:16 tells us God loves the world, it is not because the world is so lovely. God can't help himself. Oh, you're so cute. Judging by John's use of the term world, God loves the world only because of what and who God is. God's love is not dependent on who we are, thank goodness, but on who he is. Likewise, we love others not because of who they are, but because of God, of who God is and how he loved us. It's not a matter or not whether they're worthy of your kindness and patience. It's not a matter of worthy. True love is not a matter of worthy. So let me just talk real quickly about relationships that thrive and how this works out. Patience is both a skill and a virtue that can be, it's a skill that can be developed, and it's a virtue the Holy Spirit does in us. There's a certain amount of patience that we can do, but there's a certain amount of it, quite frankly, to the nth degree, when you have been abused and when you have been harmed systematically, especially by those that you should be able to trust. It takes the act of the Holy Spirit for both patience and kindness. We aren't born with it. Matter of fact, our natural reaction is just like the infant. When they're hungry, you yell and scream until you're fed. I want it now. Patience is not a natural born thing of humanity at this point. However, in healthy relationships, patience is able to preserve and maintain composure in situations that necessitate understanding or delay. And patience happens when there's unfulfilled expectations. I expected it to be this way, but it instead is that way, which, by the way, is human nature. Listen, no one will ever live up to your expectations. And this, you know why I know this is true? Because every single one of you that I talk to, you don't live up to your own expectations. So how in the world is anyone else going to live up to them? And by the way, I'm in the same camp as you. I'm not pointing any fingers here. Patience is something that we can both train in and we ask God to do in us. They are opportunities. Patience is an opportunity to show agape love, God kind of love. When a coworker makes a mistake and it looks bad on you, for the world, it's an opportunity to make sure that it doesn't reflect on you so you can get your promotion and everyone understands they're the idiot. But in God's kingdom, it's an opportunity to love. When a neighbor continues to block your driveway, when a friend shares something about you, you told them in confidence, when a church member treats you in a disrespectful way, and if you haven't been here long, it will happen, because we're human. When a child continues to be lazy in their studies, these are all opportunities to show Christ-like love, to live as part of a different kingdom. We often make huge mistakes in romantic relationships because of impatience. We're eager to have someone complete us. We run into relationships that end up to be unhealthy. We date the wrong kind of people just because someone will accept us. We have this idea that life will instantly get better and will complete when I finally find someone. Have you actually talked to anyone beyond the first week of marriage? I understand leading up to it and the week after, it's all like, right? We talked about that little pretend fairy tale we call a wedding, right? But I'm talking about people who've really been together. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a blessing. It doesn't mean that it's great. But it's not the end all of end all. Can your spouse count on you having patience with you? Can she know that locking her keys in the car will be met with calm understanding rather than a demeaning lecture that makes her feel childish? Can he know that being found watching a football game won't automatically invite a loudmouth laundry list of better ways he should be spending his time? All symptoms of patience. Every relationship has its own problems, but what makes it perfect is when you still want to be there even when it's terrible. It's like I said about that couple, it's a commitment. Now, I do want to take a special note here. Jesus was all loving. He was patient, but he cleared the temple in righteous indignation. He spoke out against the religious leaders and their oppression, oppression of the people. God has limits to his patience. Martin Luther King said, "This is wrong. We will not lay down for injustice anymore." But he did it in a way where he still treated the person in the situation with respect and dignity. And I would just tell you that if you're in a situation, especially an abusive situation, that when it comes to your heart and this person, you need to practice patience and continue to see them as a human being. But that does not mean you lay down to injustice, because it is not kind, because they are just as much in the box of that hatred, in the box and the downward spiral that brings into life as you are, and you do them nor you any favors by not doing anything. So patience is courageous and strong in heart, but that doesn't mean that it holds the cheek out. The same disciples, remember the disciples, they were caught and they were brought before the Sanhedrin and they were whipped because they preached for Jesus. And it said that they went away rejoicing because they suffered for Jesus. But also when Paul found out that he was in trouble, they stuck him out in a basket. He didn't go looking for the leaders going, "Okay, well, hit me, arrest me." Patience does not include the toleration of evil. It just means loving the evil one. We got to remember there's a difference. Kindness recognizes that everyone carries a heavy load. And I think the best way that I can show you kindness is to share this video with you. Check this out.
Oh, this is hot.
Can you hear me? Loud and clear?
Hello, Annie.
So Wes, I know you've been my boss for a couple of years now. You have been a really great mentor to me, and I really appreciate that.
So I just want to thank you for being a great dad. You're always there to support me, even when I say, no, I don't really need this talk right now, but you're there nevertheless, and it's always just great to have someone to rely on.
For the past 12 years, you've been my best friend, and I want to thank you for everything you've done for me.
You've always been there for me, my number one friend. I think we both know that this is going to go a lot farther than school.
Although I know we've only been married for a year and a half, I know I don't always acknowledge how awesome you are.
You have a great sense of humor. You're witty and sharp.
You're a kind person and always thoughtful of others.
You are one of the sweetest, kindest, most thoughtful men and people in my life, and I really appreciate that.
And the whole time you were growing up, you made it so easy to be a mom. And I don't know if I've ever told you that.
You are absolutely beautiful, absolutely, and you are so, so talented. Keep doing what you're doing, because it is going to take you places.
Do we switch spots? Is that what we do?
Jackson.
Yes.
I'm so lucky that you're in my life today as not only a coworker, but as a friend. You're someone that inspires me every day just to keep a positive attitude and to laugh and smile and stay lighthearted.
I always really appreciate how you start singing at the drop of a hat, because you have such a beautiful voice, and I love the way that you filled my whole childhood with song.
First met you 12 years ago in kindergarten, and I'm so glad I did because you've been my best friend ever since. It's the best, so thanks.
The compliment I want to give you today that I've never said to you before is your awareness of other people and how nice you are to everyone in the room.
You're very good at making everyone in a room smile, putting everyone at ease. I admire that so much in you.
You're honestly such an amazing person. You are my best friend in the world, and you always will be. All I can say is that I really love you, and I don't know, it might be hard for you to believe because I don't act like it sometimes, but I do.
I like to say that I take after you because I think that you're just such a great person, and I aspire to be more like you as an adult. And I think that if I could be just like my mom, that would be the greatest gift I could have.
You're the most beautiful woman I know. I'm so blessed to have you in my life. I probably don't tell you that enough. Yeah.
The interesting thing about that video is that a lot of that was, I don't tell you this enough, or I've never told you this before. And I think for us, especially followers of Christ, kindness needs to be a way of life. You just notice how awkward that was? Because we don't talk that way. But that's kindness. My encouragement for you is not only to do that for people you know, but people maybe you don't know, or your coworkers or whatnot. In your worship folder is this kind of list of different ways that you can serve, that you can be kind to people, if you would. You might recognize this from our Replicate training. I would just challenge you. Maybe randomly pick one a day and just say, okay, Lord, give me the opportunity to fix something for someone today. Give me the opportunity to hear someone's story and listen and just see what God raises up. You might even set your watch to, 10:10. Whenever the alarm goes off, say, okay, well, whoever's around me at that moment, I'm going to practice kindness. A random act of kindness. As Michelle comes up, I just want to remind you, she's going to sing a song, and I want you to reflect on this. I want you to offer yourself up to this. We're also going to take an offering during this time, but it's not just a financial offering. As you pass it on, if you got nothing to put in, maybe a communication card, that would be great, but nothing else, just maybe ceremonially put your commitment before God to live this out in there. Make that be your offering. And I want to remind you that love can change the world. Real love, agape love, can change the world. Though Jesus is by far the best example, there are people, followers of Jesus, like Abraham Lincoln and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who are examples of this for you and me. That imperfect, fallible, messed up people can love like this by God's help. We just need to carry on the legacy. You pray with me. Father, we lift this offering that we're about to take up to you, but more importantly, we lift ourselves up to you. And we thank you, dear God, that you're not asking anything of us that you have not already done. And I thank you even more, dear God, that you don't ask me to be able to do it at the level that Jesus did it. That you take me just as I am. You take us just as we are. You only ask that we strive to be more patient, that we strive to be more kind, and then we allow you to do in us, by the power of the Holy Spirit, to do in us what we cannot, that we may grow in it as well, not by our effort, but by your might. May we become a people, a patient people, a kind people, where the world may see our response and our actions and give you praise. Because though they may not want to say that you don't exist, they can't deny that you do exist in your people. Imperfectly in us, but perfect through you. Will you do that work in us and through us? Continue to stir our hearts in that direction even now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.